Most people won't admit it, but it silently governs their lives. The need to be liked. It shapes how they speak, how they dress, what they share, who they associate with, even the dreams they pursue or abandon. It hides under the surface, disguised as kindness, humility, or fitting in. But beneath those masks is something far more subtle and far more dangerous. A life built around other people's expectations. You may think you're making choices for yourself, but look closer. How often are your actions driven not by your values, but by fear? Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of being seen as different, difficult, or wrong. This fear is not a flaw in your character. It's the result of conditioning, subtle, consistent, and invisible. From a young age, we're rewarded when we follow, punished when we stray. We learn that to be accepted is to survive, and to be disliked is to be cut off. So we adapt, we shrink, we conform, and slowly, the self is traded for approval. But here's the truth that the courage to be disliked reveals. Drawn from the work of psychologist Alfred Adler, you can't be truly free and universally liked. You must choose. This script is not about rebellion for its own sake. It's not about rejecting others to prove something. It's about recognizing the prison you're living in and daring to walk out, because you were not born to please. You were born to become. No one is born needing to be liked. Look at a child before the world gets to them, before shame, judgment, and correction take root. They cry when they need to cry. They speak truth without apology. They live in raw presence. They are not concerned with being agreeable. They are concerned with being real. But that freedom doesn't last. From the moment we enter the social world, school, family, community, we are taught, directly and indirectly, that acceptance is everything. Be polite, don't stand out, make others comfortable, get the gold star, stay in line, be nice. At first this seems harmless, but over time, a deeper lesson is etched into the psyche. If I want to be loved, I must become what others want me to be. This is the origin of the people pleaser, of the one who hesitates to say no, who apologizes for existing, who edits themselves down to be more palatable, more likable, more normal. Psychologist Alfred Adler argued that all personal problems are interpersonal problems, which means most of our suffering stems from how we relate to others and how we fear they see us. We don't just want to be liked. We think we need to be liked to be safe. We confuse social harmony with personal worth. But here's the trap. No matter how much you bend, accommodate, or perform, someone will always dislike you. No matter how perfectly you play the part, someone will still judge the performance. So you end up living a life that isn't yours, always shaped by other people's preferences, opinions, or projections. Your identity becomes a mask, constantly adjusted depending on who's in the room. And over time, that mask becomes so convincing, you start believing it's who you really are. Adler's brilliance lies in naming this for what it is, a learned survival strategy. But once you recognize it, you are no longer bound by it. Because here's the deeper truth. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be authentic. And every time you betray yourself to win approval, you confirm a lie. That who you really are isn't enough. Breaking free begins by unlearning that lie and remembering who you were before the world taught you to perform. One of Alfred Adler's most powerful ideas, and one of the most liberating, is what he called the separation of task. It sounds simple, but it changes everything. The basic idea is this: not everything that concerns you is your responsibility. And most of what keeps you anxious, resentful, or self-sabotaging is not actually your task. Let's break it down. Your task is to live in alignment with your values, to speak honestly, to choose freely, to act with integrity. But what is not your task? How others feel about you, what they expect from you, whether they approve, understand, or agree. We've been trained to carry other people's emotions as if they were our own, to walk on eggshells, to adjust our truth so others don't feel uncomfortable. But that's not kindness. That's bondage. Adler teaches, if something is someone else's task, leave it to them. Your friend's disappointment because you said no, not your task. Your parents' unmet expectations, not your task. A stranger's opinion of your choices, not your task. Of course, this doesn't mean being cold or careless. It means being clear. Because when you try to control others' responses, you lose yourself in the process. Most people live entangled emotionally and mentally, constantly reacting to how others might perceive them. They hold back their truth, not out of wisdom, but out of fear. And here's the cost. Every time you take responsibility for what isn't yours, you abandon your own. Your task is your life, your vision, your path. Not everyone will understand it. Some may resist it. And yes, some will dislike you for it. But if your life is dictated by the fear of being disliked, it is no longer your life. The separation of task is not just a psychological strategy. It's a spiritual boundary, a reclaiming of what is yours, and a letting go of what never was. Once you learn to separate your task from theirs, you begin to feel something rare, freedom. And in that freedom, the real work begins. And for the first time, you stop living to manage other people's emotions and start living to express your truth. Most people say they want freedom, but what they often mean is, I want to be free without upsetting anyone. That's not freedom. That's emotional negotiation disguised as selfhood. It's asking for permission to be yourself and calling it growth. Here's the hard truth at the heart of the courage to be disliked. You cannot live authentically and be universally accepted. At some point, those two paths diverge. One leads to self-expression, the other to self-erasure, and you have to choose. But that choice feels dangerous because we've been trained to believe that harmony is everything. We think that keeping the peace, maintaining connection, and avoiding conflict are always the right path. But often harmony is purchased with silence, with a swallowed truth, with betraying your deeper knowing just to stay liked. So we make ourselves small. We keep our real voice quiet, and it works for a while. We avoid conflict. We're praised for being easy to be around. But slowly, something starts to rot on the inside. Because every time you choose harmony over authenticity, you disconnect from yourself. And that disconnection becomes anxiety, resentment, even illness. Adler was clear. True freedom requires the courage to be disliked. Not because you want to be disliked, but because you are no longer willing to sacrifice yourself to be accepted. Let's be clear. Being disliked isn't pleasant. It stirs every survival instinct. It activates the part of you that just wants to be part of the tribe. It may feel like rejection, but in truth, It's often a refinement. You're not being pushed out of the world. You're being pushed out of a version of it that never supported the real you. And the people who fall away when you stop performing, they were never aligned with your truth. They were aligned with your mask. When you choose to live in truth, not everyone will celebrate. Some will criticize. Some will ghost you. Some will try to pull you back into the version of yourself that was easier to understand, easier to control. But something else will happen too. You'll begin to breathe differently. Your voice will get stronger. Your boundaries will become clearer. And those who resonate with the real you will begin to appear. People who aren't drawn to your performance, but to your presence. Because authenticity is magnetic. It may repel some, but it deeply attracts those who are walking the same path. This is the paradox of spiritual sovereignty. To find your true people, your true place, your true path, you must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to disappoint those who expected you to stay small. And you must come to terms with the reality that sometimes peace with yourself requires war with their expectations. But here's the reward. Once you've risked being disliked and survived it, once you've tasted that kind of liberation, you stop living under the spell of approval. You start living from the inside out. You stop negotiating your truth and start embodying it. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. It's not defiance, it's freedom. And it's the only kind that lasts. Because the world doesn't need another agreeable mask. It needs human beings who are willing to risk comfort for truth, who are willing to be disliked, not out of rebellion, but out of respect for who they really are. When you live for approval, you can't be yourself. So, over time, you create a version of yourself that will be accepted, polished, agreeable, strategic. This becomes your false self. It isn't necessarily fake, it's just edited. You show only the parts of yourself that win approval. You hide the ones that don't. And eventually you forget where the mask ends and you begin. This is the cost of people-pleasing. Not just emotional exhaustion, but existential disconnection. The false self becomes a kind of social armor. You smile when you don't mean it. You nod when you want to scream. You say yes to things that hollow you out inside. And maybe you succeed on the surface. But success without authenticity is a gilded cage. Eventually something cracks. The pressure of hiding your real self builds up, and it starts to leak out, often through rebellion. Rebellion is the first instinct of the repressed. You say no to everything. You swing from people-pleaser to lone wolf. You break rules not because they're wrong, but because you're angry they ever held you. But here's the paradox. Rebellion is still a reaction. It's still being controlled, just in the opposite direction. You're not creating your path. You're defining yourself by not being what they wanted. This is the danger of unchecked rebellion. It may feel like freedom, but it's still rooted in others. You're still handing them power, just through defiance instead of submission. The real path isn't rebellion. It's individuation. Individuation is a term from Carl Jung, and it means something deeper than identity. It's the process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of yourself you've rejected, abandoned, or buried to fit in. It's reclaiming the self from the mask. This is where Jung and Adler meet. Adler tells us to stop living for others. Jung shows us how to become who we truly are. And that process begins in the shadow, the place where we've hidden all the parts we were told were too much, too weird, too intense, too wild. Your anger, your ambition, your creativity, your voice, your truth. You don't destroy the false self through rage. You dissolve it through truth. By recognizing, This is who I became to survive. But it is not who I am. Individuation is not loud. It doesn't seek revenge or validation. It's quiet, focused, internal. It says, I don't need to be liked, and I don't need to rebel. I just need to be honest with myself and with the world. This is the shift. You stop living to be accepted, and you start living to be real. And from that place, you don't need to justify your path. You don't need to argue or prove. You simply live it. And in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. Because the courage to be disliked is not about pushing people away. It's about no longer abandoning yourself to pull them closer. The false self clings. The real self lets go. There comes a point in the path where you stop looking for permission. You stop asking who you're allowed to be. You stop molding yourself to avoid discomfort and start choosing yourself even when it costs you. This is where you begin to become unshakable, not because you've stopped caring entirely, but because you've recentered your life around something deeper than approval. You've chosen integrity over image, and now you live from the inside out. The unshakable self is not without fear. It simply refuses to be governed by it. It knows that being disliked is a small price to pay for being real. It knows that discomfort is temporary, but self-abandonment leaves scars. It knows that when you stop performing, some will leave, but what remains is true. Adler taught that freedom begins the moment you stop living in response to others. And Jung reminded us that the soul's purpose is not to fit in, but to individuate, to become whole. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like saying no without guilt. It looks like telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. It looks like showing up without a mask, knowing some won't understand, and still choosing to show up. It looks like taking back your time, your energy, your choices, because they were never meant to be managed by the approval of others. It means you no longer live in emotional debt to everyone who might be disappointed by your freedom. You've made peace with the truth. Not everyone will like you. Not everyone is supposed to. And that is not your burden to carry, because you were not born to please. You were born to become. And to become who you truly are, you must pass through discomfort, disapproval, and at times, isolation. But what you find on the other side is worth everything you leave behind. You find clarity. You find peace. You find your own voice, not the borrowed language of expectations, but the grounded resonance of the self. And from that place, you don't just walk differently, you live differently. Not above others, not below them, but in alignment. This is not arrogance, it's self-respect. It's the refusal to live one more day pretending to be someone you're not. You were not born to be agreeable. You were born to be authentic. And every moment you choose your truth over their comfort, you step further into your power. This is the path of sovereignty.
This is the work of liberation.
And this is the fire we walk through at Arcane Praxis, where masks are left behind and the self is reclaimed.